This video is personal to everyone because it's the story of you and how you got here. In terms of the biology, you are amazingly lucky to be here, probably more than you can possibly imagine. Here's why. This video is not going to be aimed at biologists, but in my humble opinion, it's one of the greatest stories ever told because it's about each and every one of us played out over billions of years. And on top of all that, it's true. So where to begin? Where does your story begin? Well, really to answer that, you have to go back in time. 4.5 billion years ago, a big swirling ball of molten larvae hanging in space. And then it cools, and what has always amazed me is that life, that spark of life, happened amazingly early. For most of Earth's history, life in one form or another has been present, so it's unbelievably ancient. So you might say that's all very interesting, but what about me? What's my story? Well, your story is the same to some extent to my story, and our story is that something happened 4 billion years ago. Something happened, and that something was a replicator came into existence. So what's a replicator? A replicator was something that could make copies of itself. No one knows exactly what this first replicator was. We know it must have happened, and it's probably only happened once. And there's the key. Something that could make copies of itself, but over time, if it made 1,000 copies of itself, for example, it would make the occasional mistake. And once you get mistakes, things are not identical to each other. And when things are not identical to each other, that means something is better or worse or the same. And that is the material for natural selection. So, time for another analogy here. Let's say we had a big pond billions of years ago. This replicator was in the pond and it was replicating itself, and every so often it made a mistake. It made another kind of version of itself. Now let's just say, luckily, this one replicator was slightly faster at reproducing itself. So therefore, in that particular environment, it was better. So over time, that kind of replicator that could replicate more quickly would overrun this pond and eventually would become more successful, and the others would become extinct, and the replicator, the more efficient one, would have won the game. In a nutshell is natural selection, and that is every time you have differences, some will be more adapted to the environment than the other, and they would be selected against, and only the best would survive. And those that survive would go on to reproduce, and that would drive the evolution of species. But of course, in our rich and wonderful world, there are many different ways to make a life and to be successful, to fill an ecological space or a niche. And that's why we see so many species as we do today. And I think this is the thing that I really find still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, is that your story really did begin 4.5 billion years ago when this replicator started evolving, and it's gone on evolving, and now it's evolved into DNA, and it's in you now. But that DNA that's in you has been on this immense journey. It's been through different bodies, it's been through maybe amphibians, through reptiles, and it's been through mammals and different species of mammals. All that journey has been part of your history. That DNA is in you now. You are holding the baton. But to carry on this level of improbability that you're here, one of the obvious but amazing things is that not one of your ancestors in all that time has ever failed to reproduce. It's never once succumbed to illness, parasites, or an accidental fall that killed it. Every one of your ancestors has been successful for billions of years. No one has failed. You come from an ancestor of real, true winners. And one of the other amazing things that comes out of this is that most species that have ever lived have died, and most individuals that have ever lived have died. And what I mean by that is they've died before they've reproduced. They've become extinct. You have come from this long line of winners, and no one has failed in all that time. How lucky is that? So for me personally, it deeply impacts me because I work in biology and genetics for my job. And it's always struck me as incredible that I didn't and you didn't exist for billions of years, and you won't exist for billions of more years. But you are alive for this brief spark of life, for a few decades. And we live at a time now, because of this evidence-based community we live in and this science, we can know where we really came from. So next time you're a bit down in the dumps or it's raining outside, just take a moment to reflect on the journey that you've been on. So that DNA that's housed in you, and if you've had children, you've passed on, that fragile substance has really withstood the test of time, and during which mountains have come and gone, oceans have come and gone, very continents themselves have shifted, but you have passed through all that and survived. So we really should give ourselves a handshake to a bunch of true genetic winners and survivors. Congratulations. Until next time.